everybody. This is Harriet Westmore with Women in Public Safety Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss various challenges and triumphs for those, particularly women who work in public safety, whether it's in law enforcement, corrections, firefighter, medic, social services, and any place where we serve the community. I want to welcome you. This is episode 17. Before I get into today's topic, which is going to be a serious, challenging, critical topic to discuss, I want you to hit that subscribe and share the like button so we can get these algorithms going and hopefully people can be more aware of the podcast. Today's podcast, as I said, is because it's a critical topic. And I'm not specifically talking about women in general. Sometimes I have episodes where I'm talking about general first responders that can be male or female. It doesn't matter as long as you're serving the community as a first responder in various topics. And this is what I'm talking about today, and that's called use of force. It's a very complex, prevalent topic to discuss, particularly the way things are today. But it's a topic that needs to be continuously discussed and challenged. So, use of force. It's a subjective type of topic. One have to feel justified in using use of force in their line of work. But what happens when it goes too excessive? To understand use of force, you got to understand the principles of using use of force. And if I'm looking down, please forgive me because I do have a lot of notes. I wanted to make sure I hit the main points. Law enforcement agencies use the use of force continuum. It's a model outlining the level of force appropriate in various situations. The continuum starts with mere presence, verbal commands, and then it escalates through physical restraints, less than lethal force, and the last resort is deadly force. All right, let me give you a scenario. An officer stops a suspect for questioning. If the suspect complies, then the situation is resolved quickly without any type of use of force. However, but if the suspect starts resisting or poses a threat, then the officer must make that judgment of what is reasonable to subdue this suspect into compliance without using deadly force. Deadly force is the very last resort. And it's a split-second decision that we as first responders have to make that decision. How far escalated do we have to do? Depends on how much escalated is the suspect or the offender. And that, it takes continuous training. No, there's no cookie cutter, there's no clear cut answer. It depends on how you feel as a reasonable that you were threatened, reasonably feel that you were threatened enough to where you will have to escalate the level of force in order to gain control and custody of that offender. We have high profile cases such as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And those cases have highlighted the systemic issues of use of force, particularly in the minority communities, narrowing it down to African American, Black communities, and Latino communities, specifically Black communities, where I can personally relate to. You see excessive use of force, and I'm always questioning, okay, how much force was needed if the person was already in custody in handcuffs? I think once you take a person in handcuffs, that lessens the threat. Not necessarily making it go away, but it does lessen the threat. So how can you justify deadly force when person was already in handcuffs and pretty much in compliant at that point? And situations like the high profile of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Eric Gardner, cases like it goes to another level of highlighting the systemic difficulties within the African American community. Also, we got to look at mental health because that's always a challenge. If this person that we're trying to gain control of, if does he have mental health issues, there has been a lot of use of force that had to be used, particularly if the individual is suffering from schizophrenia. I know personally that unfortunately officers have lost their lives because this person that they were trying to take control of, he had a gun, he in his head thinking that he was in threat. So because he suffered from schizophrenia, not necessarily saying that all mental health individuals are threatening. They're not. I'm just saying sometimes it takes a little more use of force to keep them in control to be able to handle the situation. But unfortunately, lives have been lost in the midst of all of that. Uh, again, it takes specialized training. It takes ongoing training, ongoing feedback, and ongoing establishing good relationships within the community. That's where community policing comes to play. If you, as an officer or first responder, know your community, know the people that you serve within that, know them on a first name basis, know the families and everything, more or less will have a better cooperation and more less resistant. I knew two officers unfortunately lost their lives, but within their district or where they were working, they were part of the community policing program. But it was a suspicious vehicle call, and however, whatever happened, the suspect got a hold of one of the officer's service weapon and was able to unalive both officers. But because those two officers were very well known within the community was really saddened and very cooperative as to who this individual person was, and they made sure that this person was cooperating, made sure that the person was caught. I mean, it didn't take long. They knew who he was, and so it didn't take long for the suspect to be in custody. And also, but again, the community came together. They knew these two officers personally. They were well known and well liked within the community, and this was in a predominantly Black community. These were two Caucasian officers that worked within the in this particular area of the community that was predominantly African American, and the community came together and they were well liked. So again, use of force, you have to, it's a split second decision. Let's go into racial profiling. Now, racial profiling, as we know, is a discriminatory practice by law enforcement targeting individuals for suspicion of crime based on race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. That's still prevalent, which also comes into, well, how much use of force did you use? Did you use force because that person was not compliant, or you've already racial profiled that person and you already had it in your mind that extra force was going to be used on that individual just because maybe this particular person was in a certain neighborhood where you felt that he or she shouldn't have been in, to use it based on race or national origin or religion or whatever. Like I said, use of force is so complex. It is so complex. So where did use of force come from? Let's talk the history of it. Let's go back to history of use of force. Well, we can always go back. When I think of the history of policing, always think about days of the Wild Wild West, so to speak. Wild Wild West, we're talking about the days of when police were usually U.S. Marshals, sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, deputy marshals, or city police. And they were basically common people that, not who had little training, but were elected by maybe city officials or by the government, the U.S. Marshal. They would try to keep law and order in a chaotic town by any means necessary. As we all know, we know how the West was back in the day. You can be hung or shot for stealing someone's cattle, because that was a commodity and a high priced property, and you're stealing someone's horse or cattle. You can be shot. So that's deadly force. So when you're thinking about again, you're thinking about Oklahoma Territory, where it was the Indian, as they call the Indian Territory back then in the 1800s, where it was a very dangerous area. You had, law enforcement was few and far between. Maybe you have a deputy marshal who would cover a whole vast of area, one law enforcement officer. So crime was running rampant. It was very dangerous. And then at the same time, law enforcement and outlaws, it kind of like sometimes blurred the lines who was on the right side or who was not. Sometimes, police and U.S. Marshals, and they kind of cross over on the wrong side, so to speak, and became outlaws. Or outlaws were elected to be the town sheriff or anything like that. And so use of force there was no parameters. It was pretty much who was up for the job and was willing to take on that responsibility. Then you come to after the Civil War, you go to the Reconstruction era, where African Americans who were a lot of were freely slaves, were trying to be a part of their community, but was being harassed. That's just by not their white counterparts, but also by police, which is why there's a lot of contentious relationship between the police and African American communities and Latino any community that's minority communities. There's a history there, bad history between the police and these communities, because a lot of times the police was involved in a lot of the illegal activities of harassment and threats and killings and lynchings. So henceforth is why centuries later, years, wanted to develop community policing to try to debunk that stigma between the police and the citizens of whom they were supposed to serve and protect. Institutional racism within law enforcement agencies further exacerbates these issues. It can manifest that intentionally or unintentionally disadvantage minority groups. Zero tolerance, for instance, zero tolerance policies and aggressive policing strategies in minority neighborhoods often result in higher rates of arrest, use of force, and perpetuating the cycle of the mistrust and conflict within the community and the police. So, what do we do about this? There's now been campaigns called the 8 Can't Wait, which is launched by Campaign Zero, which is a police reform advocacy group. It highlights 8 specific policies that research suggests can help reduce police violence or use of force, excessive use of force. Let me put it that way. I'm not going to say does not eliminate use of force, but excessive use of force up to 72%. Ban chokeholds and strangleholds. Those are one of the things that are not, it's considered excessive use of force. A lot of it requires de-escalations, which is often, we call it in our field as a parole officer or corrections, everybody should IPC skills. Try to use our IPC, which is interpersonal communication skills. We try to talk to individuals to de-escalate the problem, to de-escalate, because we don't, at the end of the day, most of us don't want to use of force. I don't want to pull out my weapon or my pepper spray to use force on an individual. I just don't. But not to say that I won't. If I feel reasonably threatened, and it has to be a reasonable threat that my life is in danger, then yes, I have to do what I have to do. I have to use force. But again, it goes in steps. can you talk this person to come into compliance? That's the best way, is to talk to, use a de-escalation training of talking to them, giving them clear verbal commands. If they're still non-compliant, they're still argumentative, you can be argumentative back and forth. But if you feel that that person is going for a weapon, then that escalates the use of force on the continuum. If it's obviously, if that person has a firearm, then that's where deadly force is necessary to subdue uh, the individual. When you see a firearm on that person, then that's escalating the reasonable way use of force to, to lethal to deadly, because now your life is in danger, or life of others that you're trying to protect. Other ways that we can handle the problem is, just using mental health crisis, using the training. A lot of us have gone through what we call first response mental health training, where we can kind of recognize there's mental health issues there with this person. As first responders, we can recognize that and govern ourselves according to that. Again, that does not say that excessive or deadly force shouldn't be used. I'm just saying, we see that there are some mental health issues going on here. How can we safely get this person in custody and safely get him to a facility where he needs to get the help that he needs? Also, is the community policing. We need more of that. We need to know who our officers, who our first responders are on a personal basis, particularly in minority areas, because I think African American and Latino and other, if we can break that stigma that first responders or law enforcement or whoever are there to hurt them, break that stigma, and that we're there to help and build a relationship. And it starts with having a relationship. And that takes time. It takes time, because you're talking about stigma that's been on since the beginning of time between police, law enforcement, or anybody with authority against marginalized communities. Rightfully so, because a lot of times it's been authority that has been a part of the violence and the harassment and the terrorist threats against marginalized and systemic communities. Is constantly having conversations, having the community be involved in the community policing. Is officers wanting to be a part of that community, that they, it's more than just riding around and stopping people and profiling them. It's getting to know who lives where and what street that in your jurisdiction area. You have to know pretty much who's his families or kids particularly. And I think that and keep that open communication between citizens and the police. You got to keep that communication open. But like I said, use of force, it's it's a complex subject. I see both sides, not only as a African American individual as myself, but I'm also a law enforcement officer. So I see it both ways, and there has to be a ongoing, and just keep retweaking the training. It's like I said earlier, there's no one size fit all. It's not. We're going to have to use various techniques, and just using each case by case and study what went wrong and why, and what can we do to do better. And the whole main goal, especially for me, is never to get to the point to where I have to do any type of use of force. The only use of force I will want to use is verbal commands, or my interpersonal communication skills, IPC skills. So with that being said, I'd like to hear your feedback. If you have stories or have suggestions, if you have comments, let's keep it respectful. We can always agree to disagree, but let's just agree, disagree respectfully. I always like to hear all perspectives from all kinds. So, again, hit that like and subscribe button, and I will talk with you soon. You guys, please be safe, and know that I try to bring stories that affects us not only as a private citizen, but as a community and as a first responder. I can tell you from firsthand. So next week I'm gonna do a case study. I'm gonna do it. Haven't done a case chronicle, so that'll be hopefully by next week. I can have that for you. All right, you guys stay safe, and I will talk with you soon. Bye.